Okay, welcome to the PowerGenius, PowerGeniuses. This is a quick video on the basic configuration settings for a control module. So I'm not going to go through any real detail. I just want to quickly run over the basics. So we're going to take a control module, which is the most commonly used, and that's the hot water cylinder. So if we click on the hot water cylinder tile, you'll see you come up into the background. You see the main tile. Now, remember this tile here, the module that you would call a software module, is actually reflecting a physical, well, it's actually reflecting a piece of software running on the physical device in the home. So this is running on the hot water cylinder controller. Now, you can see up here the little address bar. If we click back one here, so if we go back to the hot water cylinder, that's the actual control module itself. And you can see all the modules that are running on that device. So all the software, those are the ones that are enabled. And then if you click this little down arrow, you can also see the ones that are disabled, okay? So let's go back, click on that control, on that module, and here we go. So we've got configuration, which is what we're going to go through. We also have a whole lot of other things like tools. You can live poll it, so you can click on live poll, and it will give you updates every 10 seconds and refresh the data every 10 seconds for that module. Quite handy for testing. Download data, you can download various bits of data, but you can also click on a chart. So if you click on the chart, you can see there, you've got the temperatures. This is for 1 week. You can go to a month, 3 months, whatever you want to go to. And then you can zoom into a part of the chart and figure out what's going on if you need to. Then one click will just take you back to the zoom mode. But let's look at this. So we'll go back to the dashboard. We'll click on the hot water cylinder. Now we're going to go to edit the configuration. Now you got to put a reason in, so I'm just going to put demo, and I'm not going to change anything. But if I accidentally click save, then I know that that's just as a demo, and I can revert back to a previous configuration if I want to. Do I want to enable this module or disable it? Obviously, if we're programming it, it's going to be enabled. We want it to run. Log interval, the minimum log interval you can have is 5 minutes. That's just how often it logs its data up to the dashboard. Some modules you'll see are 15 minutes. You may push that out to an hour. If you're on a cellular network, you could do it once every hour or every half an hour or something like that. In future, we will be having 30-minute updates for 0 subscription customers. Now, when the pair is on, so if it's a dual output controller, which the 25 amp controller has got 2 outputs, and if both outputs on would exceed the controller's current limit. So imagine you had 2 4 kilowatt elements on a 25 amp controller, you would then need to say to one of the programming modules for one of the outputs needs to disable when the other one is on. Don't need to do it with both. You just need to prioritize which one is going to remain enabled when both of them decide they want to turn on. So you can enable that. So that means if it's enabled, then this module has priority. If they're both enabled, they'll just both run independently. Or if you disable it, it means this module doesn't have priority. Okay, so let's get the temperature. Are we using 2 temperature sensors? If we are, then just enable both of them. If you're not going to use one sensor, you can ignore one or use it. Now, this also just shows up the temperature on the tile itself. Temperature during peak. Do you want the hot water cylinder to heat up during peak time or not? So this is saying yes, peak and off peak. It doesn't matter. But you could just say off peak only. So if you've got expensive power during peak time, then ignore the temperatures. Even if the cylinder goes cold, you don't want to heat during peak time because it costs too much. You'd rather have cold water. Temperature control. Does the load need temperature control? If it's a cylinder or a heater or any kind of heating appliance, yes, you enable that. So notice here that temperature control is what enables controlling the appliance by temperature, not using the temperature sensors. If you have temperature control disabled and you're still using the temperature sensors, well, these temperatures will just record and they'll just show up on the tile, but they won't be used to control the device. So that's handy, say, for a swimming pool pump where you got a filter pump, but you want to just measure the temperature of the water as well. And so you can see on the tile what temperature the water is, but you're not controlling it because you've disabled the temperature control. Auto latch, that's for an appliance such as a washing machine or a dishwasher, where you have the module waiting to turn the power onto the appliance. When the power turns on, the appliance will then just run, and it will stay on no matter what else happens on the site. So if you've got a lot of import or you've got different rules happening and it would want to turn the appliance off normally, it won't. It will just stay on. What else this does is it's designed for a dishwasher or a washing machine specifically, or any device that once you turn it on, you want the thing to stay on and complete the load. So what else it does is when you power cycle the controller, it will come back on in auto off mode. So basically there'll be no power on the appliance, but the controller will be waiting for an on signal. And that might be export, it might be cascading, it might be a timed signal, could be anything, but it's the appliance is off. More explaining on that later, different video. Temperature mode. Is it a heating load or a cooling load? That's pretty obvious. Is it a hot water cylinder or a heater or a heat pump, or is it a deep freeze or a fridge or a walk-in chiller, or what actually is it? And so therefore the temperatures kind of transpose. The on temperature becomes either high or low, depending on whether this is heating or cooling. So ignore, actually that's the other way around, but ignore temperature fault. Controller response to a failure in all temperature probes. If there's a fault with the temperature probes, what do you want to do with this module? Now, if it's a hot water cylinder and there's a fault, something's gone wrong, someone's tripped over the wires, or something's been thrown in against the cylinder cupboard, or something's gone wrong, the temperatures have faulted, both of them, it will force the appliance on. Great for a hot water cylinder because you want to stay, you want the, the cylinder to stay hot. But if it's a heater, or if it's, say, a hot water heat pump in a swimming pool, for instance, you certainly don't want it to force on. So you just ignore that temperature fault. You don't want it heating the swimming pool just because the temperature sensor's been ripped out. Default manual time. When you click the on or the off button on the appliance, on the dashboard, or when you push the on button or off button on the 10 amp controller, there's a manual button on that controller, that will turn the appliance on or off for this amount of time, a default amount of time. Now, when you're doing it on the dashboard, you do have the option to change that time, but it's better just to go, hey, it's set for 1 hour, turn it on for 1 hour. Or if you want it to set, for instance, for my electric vehicle, it's set for 6 hours. If I want to turn it on manually, I want to get a good 6 hours into the vehicle. Okay, minimum on time. This is how long it must stay on before you're allowed to turn back off again. And same minimum off time, must stay off before you're allowed to turn it back on again. So if it's, say, a heater, who cares? You can turn that on and off as many times as you like. But if it's a heat pump, you may want it to degas a bit, or a deep freeze. So you might want to put it on for, say, must stay off for 10 minutes before it can turn back on again. You don't want that thing turning off and on and off and on and wrecking it. Same if it's a water pump or something like that. On temperature. So the temperature at which the load is forced on under temperature control, pretty obvious. If both sensors get below 54 degrees, it will turn on. Now that's both sensors, okay? So if one temperature gets below 54, it won't turn on if you're using both sensors in the algorithm. The on temperature hysteresis is basically once it drops below 54 and turns on, it will heat to 54 plus the hysteresis before it turns off. The reason for that is you want it to overshoot the mark on a hot water cylinder, because you actually want it to allow for the natural cooling of the cylinder overnight without it having to keep reheating to 54. It might get to 53.9 and then reheat to 54, and it's constantly heating the whole cylinder. It doesn't need to do that. Once it's up at 54 plus the hysteresis, it gives it 4 degrees Celsius to drop overnight naturally through the insulation of the cylinder, which also allows then the bottom of the tank to become cooler as hot water is used the next morning without an emergency reheat. Okay, because remember, it's both sensors have to be below 54. If the top sensor is still at 58 and the bottom's at 30, great. Typically, by the way, a cylinder will lose about 0.3 degrees Celsius per hour on average, some more, some less, indoor, outdoor, in the ceiling, temperature surrounding it, what sort of insulation it's like, how many pipes it's got coming out of it, all make a difference. But about 0.3 degrees Celsius per hour is pretty average. So on temperature delay is how long does it have to be below that temperature before it forces the element on. So you might delay that for 10 minutes, or you might just have it coming on straight away. I have some sort of delay in there just in case you've got a temperature sensor that gets spiked by a power spike, or the processor has to reset and the temperature comes back at 0 for 1 second and then boots up properly. Then you don't want it turning on just for that. Off temperature, how high? Normally you'd set this at 75 or 70, depending on the cylinder. It's usually got a rating on the side of the sticker. The maximum temperature should be X. That might be 75 degrees. In this case, my cylinder is a wetback cylinder, so it can actually boil no problem. So I just turn it off at 92. Pretty pointless boiling water out onto the roof. Might clean my solar panels, but that's about it. So off temperature hysteresis, temperature must change this amount to stop inhibiting the load under temperature control. So that's basically, if it gets to 92, it's going to turn off. When it gets to 91.5, it'll turn back on and continue running as per normal. So you may want that to drop back 5 degrees before it turns back on, but you may want it to drop back a small amount so that at least you can capture extra energy into the cylinder. Off temperature delay, again, what sort of delay do you want it to drop past this amount before it turns back on again? Okay. Another way of turning appliances on is the export threshold. Now imagine this is now say a swimming pool pump, and you want it to turn on when there's a bit of export happening. You would say it should be exporting more than what the swimming pool pump draws. Not too much more, but a fair bit more probably. So let's say the pool pump is a kilowatt. I would set this up at 1.5 kilowatts. So when it exports 1.5 kilowatts for 20 seconds in this case, then it will turn the appliance on. Simple. Import threshold, that's at what point will that appliance turn off? Again, if it's a pool pump, you may say, look, I'm happy to import a kilowatt, but if we start importing more than that, turn the pool pump off, and then we're not importing so much from the grid, and then we can go back to waiting for the export threshold again. Now, in that case, you probably don't want the thing turning on and off, on and off, on and off. So the way you can control that is using the delay, import delay and export delay. That's the import delay, but you can delay it. And you can also use the minimum on time, minimum off time, wherever that is. It's up there somewhere. Minimum on time, minimum off time. So once it turns on, the pool pump has to run for at least, say, 10 minutes or something like that. Now, import threshold and import threshold peak. You may allow it to import energy during the day when it's sort of daytime rates, but when you get to peak rates, you may not want it to import anything. So you might go, look, if we're importing anything during peak rates, turn this appliance off because I don't want to pay for it. So that's why there's 2 import thresholds there, and import delay, as we talked about. Right. Cascade node, we're still on the pool pump, and we actually want the pool pump now to respond or to turn on when the hot water cylinder is up to a certain temperature. So I can go, right, I'm going to cascade to the hot water cylinder. I'm going to look at the hot water cylinder. I'll look at the software module running on that device. So that's the hot water cylinder. Now I want the hot water cylinder to be at least 50% before I turn the pool pump on. Right. And then it will turn the pool pump on at 50%. Now we look down here at cascade power threshold. We also want the cylinder to be drawing at least 1.5 kilowatts, and then the pool pump will turn on. So it has to be up to 50% of temperature, and it has to be at 1.5 kilowatts before the pool pump turns on. The reason we go for a percentage and we call it saturation and not temperature is because eventually we're going to be monitoring batteries as well, and we'll be able to go 50% state of charge on the battery and turn appliances on based on how full the battery is. So cascade scale factor, this is if the appliance that we're programming is actually a cylinder or a proportional control appliance. When the appliance is on, it may turn on export, and if it's a cylinder, it should be sitting there listening to the scale target. It should be listening to the proportional target sent out by the PMM. So the PMM's analyzing the grid, it calculates a target, sends a target out. All the hot water cylinders on the site will turn onto that target. Now, this cylinder that we're programming here, let's say this cylinder is not a very high priority. It's a low priority cylinder. It's out up the back of the guest room that hardly ever gets used. But the main cylinder, we're going to cascade this cylinder to the main cylinder, right? So let's say this is the main cylinder, and the one that we're working on now is the secondary cylinder. The normal scale factor when we're not in cascade mode, so while the main cylinder is below the target temperature, we're going to go 30% for this cylinder. So it will then scale whatever it hears from the PMM down to 30%. So if the PMM is saying go to 100%, we've got heaps of solar, this will just go to 30%, whereas the main cylinder will have this setting at 100 and it will go to 100%. You may actually go on the main cylinder, set this setting to 200. And in that case, you could set this setting to 60% and it would be the same effect. Now, once the main cylinder is hot, we hit cascade mode, and then cascade scale factor comes into account. And you may go, well, okay, the main cylinder is hot enough now, let's just follow the target at 100% and start evening out the amount of energy. That's a way that you can prioritize hot water cylinders on the same phase in a house. Heat one up before the other by the secondary cylinder having the scale factor down lower. Cascade delay, cascade network threshold, pretty obvious. Update interval, doesn't really matter. Right, let's get back to normal appliance programming. Runtime period start. This basically resets all the clocks and resets all the data storage, like data logging for, say, a cumulative kilowatt hours for an appliance. And normally we reset that at midnight. But you may want an appliance to reset at 5 p.m. or something like that. So you just go 1700. That appliance might be, so a swimming pool pump, and that resets at 5 p.m. And then you go runtime period length, and that is 1 day. By default, you can reset that at any period length you want. So for a swimming pool pump, you may actually say, look, I want to do 8 hours, or say I want to do 6 hours filtering a day, but doesn't matter if I miss a day out, I just have to get 12 hours in every 2 days. So I go 2, maximum total runtime will be 12 hours, will be, say, a day. I can do a whole day if I want to, if I've got enough solar. Minimum total runtime will have to be 12 hours because it's 6 hours over 2 days. Now it's going to do 12 hours before 1700 every 2 days. If you want to do it every day, just go 1 day, and then you change your minimum total runtime to what your daily runtime would be, 6 hours. Now you may actually go, look, I actually want to do 3 hours minimum, but I want to do that every 12 hours. So your first period starts at 1700, runs for 12 hours, That's 5 p.m. And then the second period starts at 5 p.m. and it runs for 12 hours. And so then 5 a.m. comes around. 5 p.m. till 5 a.m. And then the second period starts at 5 a.m. So it's going to say it has to do 3 hours minimum runtime before 5 p.m. and it has to do 3 hours minimum runtime before 5 a.m. Okay, so that might be great for off-peak charging for an electric vehicle. One period is during solar time. So, hey, or you might be doing 2 school runs a day in the car and you need to charge it up for a certain amount of hours each day. And you also need to charge it in the morning, and you want to do off-peak in the morning. You want to do solar daytime, whatever. You can sort of muck around with that. Sterilization period. This is back onto a hot water cylinder. Okay, so just bear in mind that a lot of these settings won't be used in a lot of situations, but there's every setting in there for every appliance. So you just have that option. We don't just disable stuff because you've called it a hot water cylinder. So sterilization period for hot water has to be sterilized every 7 days, has to get to 60 degrees for 1 hour. Simple. That's the law. It must do that. Now, sterilization, there are 2 other methods of sterilization that are legally compliant, but this is the best one that's suited for solar. Sterilization boost time. Now, we added this in so that if it gets to 5 days and it hasn't reached 60 degrees, but it gets to 58 degrees, then boost it anyway and sterilize the cylinder. That means that it will probably sterilize, it only needs to bring in another 2 degrees Celsius worth of energy to do the sterilization, rather than if 7 days is up, your 7-day period might be up at midnight and it's already half empty, the cylinder, and you've got to buy 10 kilowatt hours to sterilize it every week. That's not very intelligent. So we want to wait till it gets up to a decent temperature on solar. It might not get all the way, but if it's got 2 days to go, then we'll boost it the rest of the way. So you can play with those depending on the cylinder and the amount of solar they've got. And a cancel out of that. Now, if you make some configuration updates, you can go to history, can view the configuration history. And I said my girls have long showers, so I can click on that. I click on it, and down below it shows you what configuration it was. So this is the previous value, this is the new value, and this is what was changed. So you can just run down the change column. Go, okay, I only changed the temperature from 50 degrees to 54 degrees. Simple. Okay. Now, if I don't like that setting and I want to revert back to the earlier one, I go click on that, and I've changed that temperature. So you can see as I've come into the winter, I've lifted the minimum temperature up a little bit, and my girls have longer showers, and that's all right. They can do what they want. Now I can then go click on the little cog here. It says provide a reason for making this configuration change. That will configure it back to the original, that change that I made. So that's great. So I can go, hey, I made an error on this change, so I'm going to go back to this one. Click on it, made an error, save, and it will save that old configuration. You can also see who's been configuring. So the customer might have been in here configuring stuff, and they ring you up and say, oh, I've got a problem, my hot water's gone cold, and you can look at the configuration changes and go, well, you actually disabled the temperature control on the cylinder. Here's where you did it. And then it's not on you, it's on the customer. So there is a record of every configuration change for every module on the system. Okay, so I think that's probably enough for now. That is basic configuration 101. Thank you very much for listening.